My brother shook the notary's hand before I even sat down. He smiled the way people do when they believe they've already won. I watched him from across the table, pen in my hand, and I thought, let him have it. My lawyer leaned toward me and whispered that we didn't have to do this today. I told her we did. She pulled back, lips pressed tight, and said nothing more. When the documents were slid in front of me, I signed without hesitating. 3 pages. My initials on 2 more. My brother's lawyer was already exhaling with relief before I finished the last signature. That was the moment everyone in that room believed the story was over. It wasn't. It was only then that it truly began. The letter had arrived on a Thursday morning in late November, the kind of cold gray day that settles over southwestern Ontario like it has nowhere better to be. I was working from home, sitting at the small desk in my apartment with a half-eaten bowl of oatmeal going cold beside my laptop. I heard the mail slot click and didn't think much of it. I almost left it until evening. The envelope had a law firm's return address in the corner, Pemberton and Associates, Hamilton. I didn't recognize the name. I opened it standing in the hallway still in my socks, and I read it twice before the words really landed. My brother was disputing the transfer of our father's business. Dad had passed 14 months earlier. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless, the way it usually is. He was 61. He'd run a small but steady commercial flooring company out of Burlington for over 2 decades, industrial contracts, school board jobs, the occasional government tender, nothing glamorous, but it was his and he had built it with his hands and his reputation. When he got sick, I was the one who stepped in. My brother was living in Calgary at the time, working in oil and gas, telling everyone he was too far away to help directly, but that he was there in spirit. I was 29, living 40 minutes from my parents, and I was there in every way that actually counted. I started by driving Dad to his treatments on Thursdays, then I was handling his supplier calls when he was too exhausted to talk, then I was reviewing contracts, chasing invoices, managing the 1 full-time employee, and 2 part-time workers, who depended on the company for their income. My mother had her own health issues, a bad hip that needed replacing, anxiety that worsened sharply after Dad's diagnosis. She needed help, too. I was doing both. I never asked to be compensated. I told myself it was temporary, that Dad would stabilize, that my brother would eventually show up in a more meaningful way. He did fly home for Christmas that year. He stayed 8 days, helped paint the garage, and flew back. In the months before Dad died, he and I talked a lot about what would happen to the company. He was clear-eyed about it in that way people sometimes get when they know time is short. He said he wanted me to have it. Not because he loved me more, he said, but because I was the one who understood it. I knew the clients, the crew, the contracts. I knew where the files were, and which suppliers were reliable and which ones would take advantage if you weren't paying attention. We sat with an estate lawyer in Oakville on a Tuesday afternoon, while Dad could still manage the drive. Everything was laid out properly. The business transferred to me upon his passing. My brother received the house, split equally with my mother, and a portion of the savings. The lawyer asked my father twice if he was certain about the division. He was. My brother wasn't at that meeting. He'd said he couldn't get the time off. After Dad died, I kept the company running. It wasn't a glamorous decision. I had a communications job I liked and had to move to part-time to make it work. I renegotiated 2 contracts, replaced a piece of equipment that was overdue for replacement, filed with the CRA, dealt with the HST remittances my father had let slip slightly behind in his last months. I brought everything current. I paid what was owed. My brother called me in the spring. He said he'd been thinking about his future, about moving back to Ontario, about wanting to feel more connected to Dad's legacy. I listened. I thought it was grief talking. Then he said he thought it would be fair if the company were split between us equally. I told him that wasn't what Dad had intended or arranged. He said things that surprised me with their sharpness. He said I had manipulated a sick man. He said I had always been the favorite and had used it. I didn't shout. I said I understood he was hurting and that I thought we should talk in person when he was ready. He hung up. 4 months later, the letter arrived from Pemberton and Associates. My lawyer was a woman named Claire who worked out of a small office in downtown Burlington. She was methodical and blunt in a way I respected immediately. She read through the claim and said what she thought. Your brother's case is weak. The documentation is thorough. The estate planning was done properly. The transfer was legal and witnessed. He doesn't have strong grounds. She paused in the same way lawyers do before the part that complicates things. But he's your brother. These cases don't stay purely legal for long. She was right. The first time I saw him in a mediation room 3 months into the process, I felt it physically the way grief can disguise itself as anger, until you're sitting across a table from your own family and can't tell where one ends and the other begins. He looked different, older. He had grown a beard and his jaw was set with the kind of tension that comes from rehearsing things in your head for too long. He didn't look at me when I came in. He looked at his lawyer, then at the table, then somewhere past my shoulder. I had known my brother my whole life. I had shared a car with him on road trips as a kid and argued with him over the remote and watched him graduate and helped him pack when he moved out west. Sitting in that room, I felt like I was looking at someone who had decided to become a stranger. The mediation went nowhere. He wanted 50%. He framed it as fairness, as what Dad would have really wanted, as what any reasonable family would do. His lawyer was calm and rehearsed. I sat there and listened to a version of the last 2 years of my life that I didn't recognize. In his telling, I had positioned myself, had worked my way into the business during Dad's illness strategically, had leveraged proximity while he was far away, and had no choice. I didn't defend myself much. Claire wanted me to push back harder. I asked her not to. That night I drove home along the lakeshore with the radio off. I thought about the Thursday mornings in the cancer center waiting room, the smell of the coffee from the Tim Hortons cup I'd bring Dad, the one he could barely drink by the end but always thanked me for. I thought about the stack of invoices I'd sorted on his kitchen table while he slept, my mother watching from the doorway. I thought about the equipment loan I'd personally guaranteed because the company needed the new machine and the bank needed a signature and there was no one else to sign it. I had not told my lawyer about that loan yet. I had not told anyone. It wasn't a secret exactly. It was just one of those things I had handled quietly and hadn't thought to announce. The loan was through the Business Development Bank of Canada, a secured equipment financing arrangement, $38,000, with my name as guarantor. The company was the primary borrower, but if the company couldn't pay, I was on the hook personally. I had signed it because it was the right business decision and because I didn't want to worry my mother and because my brother wasn't there to ask. There were other things too. 2 outstanding accounts receivable from a school board job that were past 90 days and required follow-up. An environmental compliance review required by the province for the chemical storage on site overdue, with penalties accumulating. A supplier contract with an automatic renewal clause that would lock in rates for the next 3 years. Details that didn't appear anywhere obvious in the business valuation my brother's lawyers had used in their filings. I had come to understand these things deeply during 2 years of running the company. My brother had spent about 4 hours inside the business premises in his entire adult life. Claire noticed a shift in me around the time we were preparing for the final hearing. She asked what I was thinking. I told her I had made a decision. She didn't like it. She made that very clear. She said I was giving up more than a business. I was giving up the record. I was allowing a false version of events to become the legal conclusion. I told her it wasn't the version of events I was thinking about. What I had started to understand was that my brother wasn't fighting for the company because he wanted to run it. He was fighting for it because he needed to believe that Dad's choices had been unfair. He needed to win in order to rewrite the story of why he hadn't been there. Giving him the win wasn't giving him what he thought he was getting. It was giving him the full weight of what he hadn't been present to learn. I told Claire to prepare the transfer documents. She looked at me for a long moment. She asked me if I was certain. I told her yes. She asked me if I had considered the personal guarantee on the BDC loan. I told her it would transfer with ownership. She nodded slowly. She was starting to understand. The morning of the final hearing, I wore the same gray blazer I had worn to my father's funeral. I don't know exactly why. It felt right in a way I couldn't articulate. The hearing room was on the 4th floor of a building off King Street. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, the particular silence of a room designed for conflict. My brother arrived with his lawyer. He looked confident in a way that was almost painful to watch. He shook hands with the mediator. He nodded at Claire without looking at me. He believed this was nearly done. When the documents were placed in front of me, I thought about every winter Saturday I had spent reviewing quarterly filings so the company could stay current with the CRA, every phone call with the insurance broker, every conversation with Tony, the full-time installer, about whether his hours were secure. I had carried all of it, and I had carried it quietly, and now I was putting it down. I signed. My brother exhaled. He reached over and shook his lawyer's hand. His shoulders dropped about 2 inches. His lawyer began gathering the documents. He was efficient, practiced, already moving forward in his mind to the next step. Then he paused. His pen stopped moving. He flipped back one page, then two, then to the schedule of attachments at the back of the transfer agreement. The schedule that Claire had prepared with careful and complete accuracy. Every liability, every obligation, every pending compliance requirement, every guarantee, all of it disclosed, all of it transferred, all of it now his. He read it again. His expression didn't collapse exactly. It shifted. The color moved out of his face the way it does when something has rearranged itself behind someone's eyes. He glanced at my brother. My brother hadn't seen it yet. The mediator asked if there was anything requiring clarification. The lawyer said he needed a moment. He leaned toward my brother and began speaking quietly. I watched my brother's face change as the words arrived. Claire looked at me. She said nothing. I said nothing either. We gathered our things and left the room. In the hallway, she walked beside me toward the elevator. When the doors closed, she turned and said, quietly, that she had never seen anything quite like that. I told her I hadn't done anything unusual. I had simply stopped carrying things that weren't mine to carry forever. The drive home was different from the other drive, the one after mediation. This one felt lighter, not happy exactly. Lighter in the way that a long thing ending feels not relief so much as the absence of a particular kind of tension you had stopped noticing because it had become constant. My phone rang before I reached the highway. I didn't recognize the number. It was my brother's lawyer. He was professional. He said there were some matters his client had not fully understood going into the transfer. He said he wanted to ensure there was no miscommunication around the existing financial obligations. I told him there had been no miscommunication. Everything was in the documents his firm had received. He was quiet for a moment. He asked if I would be open to a conversation. I told him I was always open to a conversation. That evening, my brother called me directly. He hadn't done that in almost 8 months. His voice was different. The rehearsed certainty was gone. He said he needed to ask me about the BDC loan. I told him what it was and how it had come about. He listened. He asked about the compliance review. I explained it. He asked about the supplier contract. I walked him through it. There was a long silence. He said he had thought the company was simple. He said Dad had always made it look manageable. I said that Dad had made it look manageable because he had spent 20 years learning every part of it. And then I had spent 2 years keeping it from falling apart while he was sick and after he was gone. My brother didn't respond immediately. I said I wasn't telling him this to make him feel bad. I was telling him because it was true, and because he was going to need to understand it now. He said he wasn't sure he could handle it. I told him I knew the feeling. We talked for almost an hour. It was the longest conversation we'd had in years that wasn't about logistics or logistics disguised as small talk. He asked questions he had never asked before about the clients, about Tony, about the compliance process. He asked what the company actually needed in the next 6 months to stay healthy. I answered honestly. I didn't soften the picture, but I didn't exaggerate the difficulty either. Before we hung up, he said something I wasn't expecting. He said he didn't know how I had done it while also grieving. I didn't have an answer ready for that. I just said that doing things is sometimes easier than stopping to feel them. The weeks that followed were strange. My brother hired a business advisor through the BDC. There's a program for small business owners, and he qualified. He called me twice a week at first, then once, with questions I mostly could answer. He spoke to Tony, and managed not to make it awkward. He negotiated a small extension on the compliance deadline. He called the school board contact and moved the receivables forward. I watched all of it from a distance, available when asked, absent otherwise. That was the boundary I had decided on. Not rescue, not abandonment, just the appropriate space. One afternoon in late February, my mother called. She was at the house, hers and my brother's, technically, the one they'd inherited together from Dad. She said my brother had come to visit and had brought groceries and had fixed the loose railing on the back steps that had been loose for 2 years. She said she thought something had changed in him. I told her I thought so too. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she hoped I wasn't lonely. I told her I was fine. She said she knew I was capable of being fine, but that wasn't what she asked. I told her I had been a lot of things over the past 2 years, and lonely wasn't the word I would choose. I told her I had been busy and tired and sometimes sad, but that I had also been doing something I believed in, and that had been its own kind of company. She said she was proud of me. She said she wished she had said it more clearly when things were harder. I said she had said it plenty. That spring, my brother and I met for lunch at a place on Lock Street that had been one of Dad's favorites. He was there before me, which was unusual. He'd ordered coffee. He looked more settled than I had seen him in years. He still had the beard. We talked about the business for the first part of the meal. Practically, the way you talk about things you're both genuinely interested in rather than things you're performing interest in. The compliance review had gone well. He had picked up a new contract with a property management company out of Mississauga. Tony had agreed to stay on full-time through at least the end of the year. Then he put his coffee down and said he wanted to say something. He said he had been angry for a long time, not just at me at the situation, at the fact that Dad had gotten sick, at the fact that he had been far away and hadn't known how to come back and had turned that into a story where I was the reason he couldn't. He said the lawsuit had been his way of trying to matter after the fact. He said he understood now how much that had cost me, not just the legal fees and the time, but the other things, the things that don't end up in a billing statement. I let him finish. Then I told him something I hadn't said to anyone. I told him that the hardest part hadn't been the legal process. The hardest part had been the depositions, sitting in a small room while his lawyer described me as someone who had taken advantage of a dying man. I said I had spent my whole adult life trying to be the kind of person who shows up, and hearing it reframed as manipulation that had done something to me that I was still working through. He didn't try to explain it away. He nodded. He said he was sorry, not in the quick, deflecting way people sometimes apologize when they want the subject closed. He held it. That was enough. I didn't tell him it was fine, because it hadn't been fine. I didn't tell him it was forgotten, because it wasn't. I told him I was glad we were having this conversation. He said he was too. We split the bill. He left a good tip, which Dad always said was the mark of someone worth knowing. Outside on the sidewalk, the March wind was still sharp off the lake. He asked if I would be willing to consult occasionally, as the business grew, if questions came up. Not to take it back, he was clear about that, just to be a resource from time to time. I said yes. I thought that was the right answer. Walking back to my car, I thought about something Dad had said once, early in his illness, on one of those Thursday mornings in the waiting room. He had been in a reflective mood. He said the thing about family that no one tells you is that it requires constant renegotiation. That the version you have in your 20s isn't the version you end up with, and the gap between those two versions is where most of the pain lives. I hadn't fully understood it then. I did now. The version of my brother and me that existed before all of this is gone. What replaced it is something less comfortable and more real. We see each other with more accuracy now, which means we see the limitations alongside the things worth holding on to. I think that's what my father was pointing toward, not the tidy version, the honest one. Several months later, I ran into my brother's former lawyer at a community event in Burlington. He recognized me and came over. He was gracious about it, which I appreciated. He said he had learned something from that case that he hadn't expected to learn. He said he had started advising clients more carefully about the difference between the value of an asset and the cost of owning it. He said that distinction had not been part of his standard practice before. I thanked him. I meant it. My own lawyer, Claire, sent me a short note after everything resolved. She wrote that she had a new category in her mental filing system now. She called it strategic restraint. She said she had been resistant to my approach at the time, and that she had been wrong to be. I wrote back and told her I didn't think it had been a strategy. It had been a decision made from a specific place, not resignation, not sacrifice, but clarity. When you are clear about what you are doing and why, the people around you eventually have to catch up. That is the part I think about most now, in quieter moments. There are people who are carrying things in silence right now, covering the shortfalls, managing the details, showing up for the appointments and the filings and the difficult conversations, doing it because they love the people involved and because they were raised to believe that showing up matters. If you are one of those people, I want to say something clearly. What you do is real, even when no one is recording it. Responsibility without recognition is still responsibility. Care without applause is still care. And when someone tries to rewrite your role as something smaller or more calculated than it was, that rewriting does not make it true. You do not have to shout to be right. Sometimes the clearest thing you can do is step back and let reality fill in the space where your effort used to live. That is not giving up. That is trusting that the truth is more durable than the argument. My brother sends me a company update every month now. A short email: revenues, active projects, anything he wants a second set of eyes on. Sometimes I reply with a thought. Sometimes I just write back that it sounds like he's got it. Because he does. And I have my own life back fully and without apology. That, more than anything, is the ending I was working toward.